Hello, everybody. I'm Jane Hansen. This week in the arena, we're taking a look at the issue of religious tolerance. We're obligated as Christians to respect one another's beliefs, and we live together in communities in this diocese where our neighbors might be Jewish or Islamic or even atheists. But when does our tolerance for another's beliefs cross the line? When does it become impossible for us to be okay with the way another religious group is practicing its faith? Joining us now to talk about this very important subject, Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our special guest, Father Kevin Madigan, the pastor of St. Peter's Church, the oldest Roman Catholic parish in New York City, which also happens to be located a block away from Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, and Rabbi Robert Kaplan, Director of Cause New York, a division of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here to talk with us today. So let's start with you, Monsignor. We are just early in the new year, and already there have been some pretty basic examples of religious intolerance.
Yeah, I think that most recently you have the assassination of Governor Tesser in Pakistan because of his opposition to supposed blasphemy laws, and the implementation of that blasphemy law was the execution of a Christian woman who was claimed to have violated those laws. You have in China multiple abuses in terms of religious freedom. Holy Father addressed that in his Urbi et Orbi address, and then you just have to go not too far to see how throughout the world there are many examples where one's individual religious freedoms are oppressed or infringed upon.
So as you take a look at all of this, Rabbi, from your overview of it, do you think that means we are less tolerant of one another and our religious beliefs than we ever used to be?
No, I think that religious intolerance has been a consistent throughout religious history, whether AD, BC, or whatever else we describe it as. The question is, how do we get to the point where we can be more inclusive and understanding of another one's religious beliefs and allow for them within the context of our own?
Your organization was actually created in part because of the Crown Heights riots of what, 2 decades ago?
Believe it or not, this year will be the 20th anniversary of the Crown Heights riots. As remarkable as that may seem to some of us, to others, it's ancient history. So the question is how do we handle diversity in our city that has changed so radically over the past 20 years and certainly over the past half a century?
But what I'm curious about is, do you see that there has been a growth in how tolerant we can be based upon, from those days, from that incident 20 years ago to today?
I see some really remarkable changes. And it's really based upon what the definition of diversity is in New York. If you looked at the period of time when my organization, Cause, was founded, which was originally called the Commission on Intergroup Relations and Community Concerns, was founded by the Jewish community overall and seated at JCRC, the issue was really black and white. How were blacks and whites and blacks and Jews going to get along in New York? Now, that is not really that much of an issue today. We've really learned ways to share our city, but we're sharing it with a whole new cadre of other folks that we weren't sort of used to or knowledgeable of just a short time ago. So our job was to become knowledgeable and incredibly creative in how we share communities.
Can you give me an example of who you're talking about?
Well, there's a large Chinese community here in Brooklyn. If you looked at Bensonhurst, Bensonhurst was Saturday Night Fever country when I grew up. It was and I lived in Bensonhurst for a while. It was primarily Italian, Jewish, both Russian-speaking Jews and Jews from the former immigration. Today, it's becoming predominantly Chinese. And as that change happens, how do we share communities and how do we latch on to this new vibrancy that makes a community?
One of the things that I think is really interesting about this discussion is in the contemporary culture, very often religion is identified as the root of many conflicts between people, and so there's a real proponents of secularism will say, see, all we have to do is get rid of religion, and then people will get along with one another. And the fact of the matter is that if you take a look at human history, and particularly the most recent, the last century, you can see where there was aggressive secularism, which resulted in some of the worst bloodshed and worst persecution of of people of faith in the world's history. So I think that we have to be a little sensitive here that that actually religion and religious dialogue and these questions about religious expression of religious freedom enables people, for all people, to worship freely and to express their relationship with God personally and with the broader community.
Well, Father Madigan, one of the reasons that this issue hits very close to home for you is because, of course, where your church is located in Lower Manhattan, very close to all the controversy over the Islamic Center. I know we're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but you see firsthand where that conflict hits home. And how does that affect you and your feelings about tolerating one another?
Well, curiously, the conflict is not so much between the people in the neighborhood. People in the neighborhood are very accepting of that endeavor at Park Place there. But it seems as if it's become the flashpoint for a lot of other hostile feelings towards religion throughout the country.
Mm-hmm. And so when it becomes that flashpoint, what does that mean? In some senses, we almost need a flashpoint to get us to really discuss these important things.
Well, we're at a turbulent time. There are turbulent times in our country right now, and a lot of uncertainty about the future. And in the past, when those situations have occurred, religious opposition, hostility, and prejudice has also surfaced at the same time too. So it's how do we sort of get through this moment right now, and by dialogue, by learning more about what other religions are about, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things, Rabbi, is that a lot of people in the Catholic faith, sometimes some of the bishops, some of the priests, feel like there's almost kind of a persecution against Catholics in the media and from other sects. Do you see that or at all, or do you think that it's kind of equal?
Well, you know, when we're looking through our own lens, we tend to be a little bit more sensitive sometimes. When we look at the number of hate crimes that are happening in New York City, most hate crimes that are reported are against the Jewish community. Very few are really directed towards Catholics. I am sure that folks within and without of the Catholic community have their stones to throw.
And Father?
Well, I think that there's no question that in terms of the crimes that are committed, I don't think that Catholics are singled out for persecution. I don't think that would be the claim. I think that there is the feeling among some Catholics that certainly media treatment is unfair and biased against Catholics. And what's when you speak about a bias or something that is unfair, I think it's the level of scrutiny, the number of stories, the placement of stories. It's a very subtle discrimination. It's not a discrimination which is overt, but I think it's sort of subtle. I think one of the big examples, as we go through the most recent Christmas holidays, a lot of Christians would feel, the display of a menorah, which would be considered acceptable religious display in public spaces, but a Christmas creche would not. Those are the sorts of things that Catholics would point to and say, hey, are we being singled out for unfair treatment?
Well, yeah, but I think any religion can really kind of look at this number of stories and say, why are they coming after us on this subject and why not on that? I mean, do you believe that it really all starts with the way we communicate with our children? I mean, with the whole Crown Heights thing, how did you start that process?
Well, and just an answer to the children piece, hate crimes are generally committed by children between the ages of 14 and 22. So obviously they're getting messages from somewhere. And the primary message is obviously coming from the home. But in Crown Heights, the goal was not just to put out forest fires. I was a good student of Smokey the Bear. He taught me that preventing forest fires was probably the best use of my time and energy because putting out forest fires can be very difficult and very dangerous. So we began to build relationships in the community based upon quality of life. How were people going to share a community? We found that the major reason for the Crown Heights riots were because people thought somebody was getting more than the other guy. And to be able to show that everyone can share resources in the context of a community, particularly in this time when resources are rapidly disappearing, it's going to be one of our major tools to be able to train people, to show people, to allow people to understand how we share resources and create a better quality of life for everyone that share communities.
We actually have an interesting situation developing in Brooklyn surrounding the Broadway Triangle, which I'm sure you're familiar with. There's a housing development, and there's a question about the allocation of housing how would that allocation be for some of the Jewish folks who live in that area and for the Latinos who live in that area? And it really does come to what you say, Rabbi, is to the question of, is everyone getting their fair share? And that's really becomes a cause of conflict, and it takes on religious overtones.
Which also is a cause of what you're talking about down in Lower Manhattan, too. It's something that people have talked about. So we want to get to that in just a moment. So hold that thought. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I really want to focus on the Islamic Center that's being built there and your position on all of that. So we want to remind you as we take this break that you can weigh in on our discussion anytime. You can simply go to our website, which is netny.net/InTheArena, and then click on Enter the Arena. We welcome all of your questions and your comments. We'll be right back to continue this discussion. Welcome back as we continue our discussion on religious tolerance. Joining us for this segment once again is Father Kevin Madigan, the pastor of St. Peter's Church, the oldest Roman Catholic parish in New York City, and it's also a block away from Ground Zero. And then Rabbi Robert Kaplan, director of Cause New York, a division of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. And thanks again for being here. Father Madigan, there's obviously been a lot of discussion and controversy with the proposed Islamic Center, just a couple of blocks away from Ground Zero and from your church. Your position on it is?
I'm supportive of it because of I think they have every right to be able to establish a community center such as that, to be able to serve their own needs as well as the needs of the community.
But certainly you understand the frustration of the families of those who died in 9/11 and, and all of those emotional feelings that go along with this idea.
But I think that there's the group that is establishing this community center, mosque, are not the same people that committed the atrocities of 9/11.
Right, which I think is such an important distinction to make because, I mean, how do you respond to that? What do you talk to people?
I think we want to see the Islamic community present a face of Islam that is compatible with American values, as well as with Christian values too. And and this is the kind of group that wants to do precisely that. So if not there, where?
Some people have raised questions, right, that this is a war monument, that in some sense that this is the erection of a mosque on a place where there has been a great Islamic victory. I mean, that's what opponents of the mosque would claim. Others have kind of pointed to the group that would be putting the Islamic Center there as proponents of Sharia law in the United States. Certainly the name of the center initially was Cordoba Mosque, which would have had, or Cordoba Center, which had certain implications for Christians who were, Spanish origin. So there have been some questions that have been raised. There has been, I think, some missteps. But the fact is, as Americans, I think, we have a real opportunity to show to the world in a sense of what is it that we believe about toleration and allowing others to build places of worship, places where there can be dialogue, and places where there can be discussion about what it is that we believe, what it is that we propose.
Those words you just said, Islamic victory, that must be very offensive to most people of the Islamic faith.
All those charges admit of a both negative and a positive interpretation, so that people build hospitals not because they want to commemorate some evil thing or build a community center, but because they want to be a service community. What the Islamic community is doing there is precisely the same thing that Jews and Catholics did when they were minorities in this country too. Establish hospitals and social service centers that could show their own identity, at the same time be of service community at large.
Rabbi Kaplan, your position on the creation of this center?
We took an early position. Is in support of their right to build the mosque. There are some concerns, and there's concerns whenever something new is entering into our society or something controversial. And our job, not our job as a community, as a joint community, is to assist in making this happen in the least controversial and the least destructive way as possible. So I know that the developer and the imam and the other folks involved with building the Islamic Center have pledged that they will make sure that the money doesn't come from people that we would find problematic. And that is a very deep concern. Who is going to be involved? But what we have learned and what we understand is that those who are going to be involved and those who are looking to be involved are those who are looking to build understanding between folks, not difference between folks.
Yeah, but how do you reassure people about that? I mean, that's the truth, that the funding is really where it's
And it's
coming
important
from.
because there is a lot of funding of mosques and temples throughout the United States by Saudi Arabia, which is a government which is very intolerant of other religious beliefs. For instance, if you're a priest in Saudi Arabia, you cannot celebrate Mass. You can't bring a Bible. To do so is a crime punishable by authorities. So one of the big concerns of a lot of folks is that you have governments which are hostile to other religions, intolerant, funding projects in other countries. And that's where there is this charge, which is that what is being done here, and I'm not, again, this is a charge, which I'm not, is that this is a victory monument as opposed to a monument that is to propose deeper understanding. And it's not so much a question of where one can even build a mosque, but the question becomes to build a mosque at ground zero where where a terrible attack on our nation has taken place and our values of tolerance have taken place is really what the question becomes.
But again, it's not at ground zero. It's 2 blocks away from ground zero. And Imam Faisal.
Close proximity, though.
Well, there's another mosque 2 blocks away. There have been mosques in that neighborhood for the past 30 years. And so these people that are established the center are not interlopers or newly arrived on the scene. They have solid roots in the Tribeca community.
Well, but one of the things too is also St. Peter's, your church, has been the scene of having to fight very hard for religious tolerance back in its history.
Oh, when we were first established, there was a lot of hostility to having a Catholic church in New York. The first place they wanted to have it was in stock exchanges today, and they were sort of invited or coerced to move outside the city. We were tolerated, but barely tolerated.
And wasn't there something about Francis Cooper, or there was something about an original historic figure who was like the first Catholic that had been elected?
There was a time when a person could not be a member of the United States Senate unless if he was a Catholic. He had to be he had to take an oath and all sorts of things like that. So finally, a Roman Catholic with parishioner of St. Peter was allowed to be a member of the assembly without any obstructions.
And I think that's why Christians and Jews, Catholics and Jews particularly, would be fairly sensitive on this area, because we wouldn't want to see someone's rights being infringed, especially their ability to worship, because we have experienced. I mean, right now there's the Blaine Amendment in New York State, which was specifically passed to discriminate against Catholics particularly, but now Catholics and Jews in terms of education of children.
Do you think that is the amendment?
The Blaine Amendment?
Yeah.
That's, historically, the Blaine Amendment was passed in the 19th century. It was passed intentionally so that Catholics could not open Catholic schools, which were a parallel to the public schools. And then in the 1960s and 70s, Catholics and Orthodox Jews together sought repeal of the Blaine Amendment so that they would be able to have schools which would be able to
the beauty
receive
of
funding.
The beauty of America is that we, as an imperfect society, are consistently moving to more perfecter society. We have a history full of conflict. We have a history full of things that we're not always particularly proud of. But the beauty of what we are is that we move forward. And even if we look at Crown Heights, what the city was in 1991 has improved as far as diversity goes and religious tolerance so emphatically over the past 20 years.
But do you think that could have been done if it hadn't been for the religious Jewish community making outreach to the Caribbean community, the African American community in that area? Could that have been done by a secular government, or did it have to be done by people of faith?
I always think that the community itself is responsible. Okay. Government can help, and other folks can help, and particularly those of faith can certainly be instrumental to making sure that we move forward. But it needs to be community that are the ones who are engaged in the process of understanding and building community together.
Father?
I think as Catholics, as we are aware of this discrimination we experience in this country, and the hostility towards us, then we can be more willing to assist other people who are more recent arrivals in our country as they experience the same kind of hostility. So that we've been there before, and we've sort of gotten well beyond that, as Rabbi said. But now, it's our responsibility to sort of help those others get assimilated.
Rabbi, you have done a fair amount of work with the Muslim community, have you not? Tell
Yes.
me about that experience. We've asked the Imam to come here today, and he was not able to, so I just...
Right. So I'm going to go back to Brooklyn, because born and raised in Brooklyn, there's an area in Brooklyn, in Flatbush on Coney Island Avenue, where there is a huge Orthodox Jewish community and a huge Orthodox Muslim community, sharing communities side by side. Right after 9/11, even prior to, we made sure that we were working with that community to create lines of communication. So when things did happen, And things did happen. You know, there were incidents in the community. Some kids beat up someone, and some people, yelled at another person. Community leaders were able to come together, knew each other, were able to say that this is not how we're supposed to operate, this is not the direction we're going into, and make statements that were able to cool things down and, at the same time, move things forward. So it isn't always necessarily agreeing about everything, but there is a baseline agreement that we do not want conflict in our community.
And it's called respect.
I think it's important. I think it's important that one is able to articulate what their own values are, and I think that this is really critical to understanding, is that one can feel comfortable in the articulation of one's own values, and to do so in a public square, because that's where there is a dialogue that takes place and greater sense of understanding. When one feels that I can express my point of view for whatever reason, that's when these feelings of animosity become deep-rooted and really cause cancerous.
Fester and they fuse. They
By the way, it not only works in areas where, here in New York, but Mohammed Razvi, my friend Mo, and I were two of the people that, amongst others, who helped found We Are All Brooklyn, which was a coalition founded right after 9/11 to deal specifically with this issue. Well, the United States State Department brought Mo and I to Israel, to mixed Arab-Jewish cities, and we went there and we made the statement, we're not here to solve the conflict. We're here to teach you how to share a community. And places like Acre and places like Lod and Ramla, where there are really mixes, people really embraced it and have been moving the agenda forward. So it's replicable elsewhere.
Congratulations on your great work on doing that. Keep at it, because
Thank
we
you.
need it. Father Madigan, Rabbi Kaplan, you'll be staying around, but you guys are going to leave us now. We thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break. We want to again remind you that you can weigh in on our discussion anytime by going to our website, netny.net/inthearena, and click on Enter the Arena. We welcome your questions and your comments, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to In the Arena, continuing our conversation on the issue of religious tolerance. We are joined once again by Monsignor Kieran Harrington, who's the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our regular contributors, Elizabeth Scalia, Managing Editor of the Catholic Portal at Pathos.com and author of the blog The Anchoress, and Grant Galicio, Associate Editor of Commonweal Magazine. Welcome, you guys. Okay, your thoughts on this whole issue of the mosque near Ground Zero. Grant?
I'm pro. I mean, I think Catholics as a group have experienced serious religious biases over the centuries, and that we have a particular responsibility to speak up for a religious group that is experiencing a kind of oppression.
Despite all of the symbolism of where it is and what's happened there, and
I don't
that?
see the symbolism. I mean, it's been called the Ground Zero Mosque. It's really not. It's 2 blocks away, and it's being built on a site where there was an abandoned building, and it's in a community that says it needs it, and the local community board has voted in favor of it. So I don't see any problem with it.
Elizabeth?
I think if you're someone who champions American exceptionalism and then you work against this mosque, you're defeating yourself. I think this is a defeat for conservatives who are championing America and at the same time saying, well, we believe in religious freedom, but not for you. I don't buy you have a right to build it there, but you shouldn't. I think we're a bunch of crybabies. Everybody's oversensitive. And yes, I can see the symbolism, Grant, but it's not because it's being built at Ground Zero. And I think that a lot of people look at this hole in the ground that's still not completed 10 years after the fact and saying, oh no, this mosque is a symbol of our defeat. And I think that's what's really egging an awful lot of people on.
And you?
I'm really agnostic about whether or not the mosque should be built or shouldn't be built on the site. I mean, that really is not a major concern. I do understand the argument that this might be a victory monument, that basically there has been this attack on our country perpetrated by Islamic fundamentalism.
But this group is not composed of Islamic
the question is that that's not the point, that it's composed by Islamic.
My question to you is, what is wrong with this with the guy.
I said I'm agnostic on it.
No.
I'm not opposed to the building of the mosque.
It doesn't sound like you are. It sounds like you have a problem with the guy who's running this group, who was tapped by George W. Bush to be a kind of ambassador to the Middle East and to the Muslim world.
I think there are a lot of questions about whether the placement of the mosque, where it is. I'm not opposed to it. Certainly, I would defend anyone's right to build a church, a synagogue, a mosque anywhere.
So what's the
people
safe
should have
distance?
People should be able to build religious houses wherever they want, as long as it's within the building codes. I have no problem about the building of a mosque. If you're asking me how do I personally feel about it, of course I feel a little uncomfortable about it. I feel uncomfortable about it, maybe because of my own prejudices, my own biases, because September 11th was an attack upon our nation by Islamic fundamentalists, and the thought of building a mosque on that site is problematic to me.
Well, how do you avoid a kind of bias in that judgment? I mean, you are.
I admit that I might be biased. I admit that I might be
said
biased.
That, and this whole subject during this past half an hour has been about religious tolerance. Where are there lines that you can or cannot cross?
When this issue really came to the fore last year, there was no one who was, and if you remember, the press started saying, where's George W. Bush? Because I think he would have said what really needed to be said, which is, this is America. Let us show the very best part of America, which is the living, vibrant part of America that wants everyone to have the opportunity to live and worship in freedom. But nobody said that. Obama kind of backed away, and nobody would take the reins on it.
We have one last thought from you.
I would just, I think the question of whether George Bush, could have or should have spoke, I think we know the answer. I mean, if George Bush had supported the building of this project, then he would have said so.
I think that New York is a place of enormous diversity. I think people have really, we struggle with our diversity sometimes. There have always been sort of growing pains. Catholics have experienced discrimination. That's certainly part of our history. That's right. As the Jewish immigrants to this country have experienced discrimination. So the fact is that we should be very sensitive to the fact that of what we say and how that impacts others. At the same time, I think that there does have to be sensitivity to the fact that the attack on New York, particularly the World Trade Center, was the worst attack in our nation's history. And the living descendants of those folks whose lives were so profoundly impacted still remain here. So I guess the question would be, if we were going to build a Japanese museum in Honolulu, would that provoke the same sense of outrage?
And you know
after
what?
World War II? I think it would have.
The questions that you have just raised are all issues that we will continue to discuss. The subject of religious tolerance. It's been an interesting conversation for us. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Monsignor. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And remember that you don't need a television to watch the net. We are always online at netny.net. I'm Jane Hanson. We'll see you next time in the arena.